I played in a tournament with over 2,000 players. Trading card games have been booming in popularity in these last 2 years, with many titles seeing record high participation numbers in tournaments of all levels. Japan is no exception to this, with many wanting to engage in a face-to-face hobby that brings people together in person. Thanks to this, various card game titles have seen huge spikes in tournament participation, and this one card game has managed to hit consistent numbers in the thousands ever since its Japanese launch in 2022, and even breaking the 2,000 player mark for the first time. Which game am I talking about? Shadowverse Evolve, of course. Shadowverse Evolve is a card game that I'm sure many of you are familiar with by now, being a physical adaptation of the digital TCG Shadowverse, and its competitive circuit is particularly special. Shadowverse Evolve runs what's called the Evolve Grand Prix, or GP for short, which includes the impressive main tournament with gorgeous prizes that allows for up to 2,000 players to participate, as well as a whole array of side events, exclusive merch sales, and more across 2 days. In this video, I'll tell you about my journey throughout the most recent Shadowverse Evolve Grand Prix GP Chiba and my hopes of making day 2. I'll also have a bonus video soon showing you all the other attractions and things you can do at an Evolve Grand Prix, so please look forward to that as well. Now, you're probably wondering, why would 2,000 players get together for an event like this? The answer is simple. The prizes are a very big part of it. In a GP, you get participation prizes of various powerful cards and beautiful new foiling with a special GP hot stamp, but in addition, you get rewards based on how well you do as well. The tournament is played out over 2 days. Day 1 contains 8 rounds of Swiss from a total of 16 preliminary rounds. If you manage to score 6 wins, 2 losses or better, or 6-2 for short, you get to play in the main event on day 2 as well. That means if you get 7 wins, 1 loss, or 8 wins and 0 losses, that counts too. However, if you get 5 wins, 3 losses or worse, unfortunately you don't get to keep playing. Luckily, there's still lots of side events in day 2, so there's still plenty of fun to be had. Earlier this year in the GP Chiba in spring, I participated and went 5-3, being just 1 win short of making day 2. This time around, I'm aiming to improve that record. What's the point of making day 2, you ask? Well, just making day 2 already gets you a prize card. It also means you can keep playing to potentially make top 64, which not only wins you another exclusive prize card, but this time they have even added an exclusive playmat for the very first time. As a competitive TCG player, these bragging rights are pretty hard to resist. And of course, the best part of it all, making top 8. If you make top 8, you win the glorious prize card of that season, which this time was this alternate art Huon. In the past, you may have seen that beautiful Gilnelly's art floating around too. That too was a top 8 prize card. They are incredibly rare as only the top 8 get them, and the semi-finalist manages to win a second copy while the winner of the entire tournament takes home a whole playset of 3 copies. And that's still not all. All the top 8 players also get an invite to the Japan Championship. All participants of the Japan Championship, or the JCS for short, get incredibly beautiful prizes and get to fight for the #1 spot in Japan. Last year, we had this beautiful Alice distributed to the JCS participants, so of course everyone wants to gun for that invite. But if getting top 8 in a 2,000 plus player tournament every time in order to get your invite to JCS was the only way to do it, that would be a little bit too harsh. Luckily, there's actually quite a few other paths too. There are various events across the country that grant invites, especially in more rural areas that don't have as easy access to GPs, and there's actually a whole shop tournament circuit which I played in during the summer. Here, you get to apply to 3 different shop qualifiers of your choosing, but you strictly only get 3 chances. Here, you must win the whole thing in order to qualify for an area qualifier of the area that the shop is located in. In my case, I live in Tokyo, so I was aiming for the Kanto area qualifier. Luckily for me, after going 3-1 in my first shop qualifier and being just close of winning the whole thing, I signed up to my second one and managed to win the whole thing with my beloved Galmu Dragoncraft deck. At this time, the Japanese version of Evolve was in the set 6 meta, which saw Kuon Runecraft as the most popular deck, but we had just come off of Forestcraft winning all of GP Osaka during that month. Forest likes to go wide and spam their board, and Ganmu likes to deal damage to your opponent's board and the opponent's face, so it felt like a perfect read into the meta at the time, which I'm glad it worked out. So now that you know a little bit about the environment before GP Chiba, let's talk about how it changed going into this event. For this Grand Prix, the big release was the second collaboration set, Idolmaster Cinderella Girls. If you don't know how Shadowverse Evolved collabs work, it's pretty simple. They released them as a new class where you can play all the Idolmaster girls of all different classes in the same deck, and you'll notice that each of them belongs to one of Shadowverse Evolved's original classes too. What this means is that you can also put cards from respective classes, such as let's say this Fumika that is a Dragoncraft card, into a Dragoncraft deck while also being able to play it in an Idolmaster deck. This collab set is a genuine 10 out of 10 too. They released 3 different starter decks that each support a unique archetype and playstyle within the Idolmaster class. Cool is basically fast aggro, Cute is long game sustain, and Passion is a bit more of a mixed high roll type that can be easily splashed into other classes too. The big winners were Cool and Cute, as especially Cool was rated as the best deck in the format. Not only because it's fast, but also because it was cheap. All you had to do was buy one trial deck and some GRs and below, and you had a tier 1 deck for about 3,000 yen. Don't forget, tier lists aren't just about what is objectively the best deck. It's gonna be about what's most represented and what you're gonna face in tournaments the most. If you told me that I can play a tier 1 deck for a mere 20 bucks, chances are I'm game. Cute popped up as the reaction to this though. Being able to heal a bunch and drag out games, it makes use of Cool's weakness in that it typically does run out of gas once it's exhausted its big early game and the searchers it has, often relying on top decking their lethal plays. Cute rose up in the ranks as a big contender purely for its good matchup against the aggro queens. There was a third Idolmaster deck that was cooked up by professional Shadowverse player Riguze called Combo Idolmaster. This played very similarly to Forest decks. You use the card called Anastasia to refund yourself a bunch of play points and play a bunch of low-cost cards that then left up a big buff board. Very similar to Amata's, just a bit smoother for this current format, and it also had the surprise factor initially too. This deck was also rated quite highly. And of course, I wouldn't be saying that this is an excellently designed set if Idolmaster was the only competitive class. As previously mentioned, Kuon was one of the big decks introduced in set 6, and boy did it make a comeback. Kuon's strength in that it gave this win con to Spellchain on top of Dimension Shift, where now you put a bunch of big stats on the board for no cost using Kuon's self-reduce effect, and then you Dimension Shift for game. You might be thinking, but how does Kuon even survive to that point in this aggro meta? Luckily, the spells galore means that you have a plethora of quicks to deal with aggro matchups quite well too. Kuon wasn't rated as highly as Cool prior to the event, but it was definitely going to be a threat. Can't really say the same thing for the other big winner of set 6, Amata's Forest. Amata's really needed time to gather its combo pieces before unleashing its crazy attacks, and Cool is not gonna give it that time. Sword decks kind of face the same dilemma, except that many of the best Idolmaster cards did belong to the Swordcraft class. While some tried to cook, others went, hey, if Idolmaster does what Sword does but with less steps, might as well use that, right? Abyss always kind of floats around due to being able to play control now and force the opponent to ditch their hand, so if you time your effects right, you can really hit Cool where it hurts. Viable, but definitely not the most popular strategy. Haven was interesting with its 3 viable archetypes, Control, Ward, and Alice. Alice Haven was the best deck back in set 3 and onwards for a while, but much like Forest, Cool wasn't gonna give them the time to spend a turn setting up their huge explosive combos. Ward, however, was incredibly well paired. You're just putting down constant walls against a deck that wants to go face and stopping them in their tracks. Finally, Control Haven was actually one of the top decks in the previous format, and the ability for constant removing while sustaining yourself and leading to the huge win con of Heavenly Aegis is never gonna be bad in a format where an aggro deck is rated as the best. Now, you're probably realizing that there's one class I haven't talked about yet. Yes, Dragoncraft. As you remember, I was playing Dragon all of last meta and managed to win my area qualification with Galmio as well, partially because it was a good reading to the meta, but also just because she's one of my favorite Shadowverse characters period. However, I had to be real with myself. If this deck wasn't gonna cut it in this meta, I had to reconsider. I spent a lot of the early testing just learning Idolmaster, primarily Cool, but I built Q just to have it too. However, from a lot of this testing, I just felt like it wasn't fitting me quite right. It's not that I can't play aggro in card games, but it just always feels like having to sprint at all times until you match into a big counter deck and have to stop was gonna be a painful process for the GP. Not to mention that because it's the most popular deck, while being so cheap, I had to expect to play their mirror match non-stop, and aggro mirrors aren't really my thing in card games. So I decided to look at what people were cooking with Dragon with the new Idolmaster girls. The first card that truly stood out was Fumika, for a variety of reasons. She's a 7-cost follower that has one effect that only applies to Idolmaster, but the other is very good in Dragon generally. On Fanfare, she plays an original cost 3 and original cost 1 follower from your deck for free. Not even talking about the Galmu engine itself, which we'll get into in a second, this lets you easily access some of the most powerful generics that Dragon has in the card pool, like Prime Dragon Keeper into Phylene to ping the opponent's board and face, while freezing a follower with Phylene's Fanfare for a turn, and Phylene's second Fanfare is now active since you're in overflow to search the spell that destroys an opponent's engaged follower while dealing them 2 face damage. Fumika felt like an auto-include based on this already, but there was also greater synergy with Galmu's actual engine too. To explain what Galmu is as a deck, it's basically a mid-range engine that forces you to ping damage to your own followers to proc various effects. Galmu, for example, says that if you ping her during your turn, you can evolve her for 0 play points instead of the usual 2. On top of that, once she evolves, she gets to replay a 2-cost or lower Disdain card from your cemetery for free, and if she's dealt damage by an effect during your turn, either your effect or your opponent's effect, she deals 3 damage to either an opponent's follower or your opponent's leader. An important ruling is that if a Disdain card were to be destroyed by effect damage, not destroyed by effect itself, then you still process that when effect damage is dealt effect first before sending that card to the cemetery. So yes, if you surefire my Galmu, I will deal 3 damage to your face before she goes to the cemetery. Now let's take a look at some of the other Disdain cards, which are the big contributing factor as to why I've been on this deck for so long. Servant of Disdain is a 2-cost follower that whenever it's damaged by effect during your turn lets you draw a card. Not once per turn, by the way. Very good in finding your other pieces, and its Fanfare on Overflow lets you ping itself plus any other follower for 1 damage each, proccing his own effect and proccing your other cards like Galmu, or taking out one of your opponent's followers with 1 defense remaining. Disciple of Disdain is kind of that engine starter. It once per turn lets you deal 1 damage to one of your followers, so it's the cheapest way to set up Galmu's free evolve. Because we play 3 of him and 3 Phylene, we also max out on Fina. She's a generic 2-cost that can either destroy an opponent's 1-cost follower, which is huge in this meta due to the amount of powerful 1-cost Idolmaster followers, but you can also check the top 5 cards of your deck for a 1-cost follower of your own, so she's a perfect fit for both of those abilities. Now, there are 2 Disdain spells that have made this deck become so highly rated all of a sudden again in this meta. The first is Disdainful Rending, a 1-cost spell that deals 1 damage to one of your followers and 3 damage to one of your opponents. Proccing your own effects while taking out your opponent's followers without them being able to react with a quick is a huge advantage in this format, and it's only 1 cost, so it's another cheap Galmu enabler too. Hakyoku, Galmu's own weapon that you can see on her arm, is an Evolve original card that didn't exist in the app version. This is a 2-cost Disdain spell that allows you to deal 2 damage to one of your followers to deal 2 damage to all of your opponent's followers. And what's best, if Galmu is in play, that area of effect damage becomes 4 instead. This is the card that helped me beat all the Forest players in the last format, and it's going to be huge in this meta too. Doesn't matter if you can go wide with aggro if I can just take out your whole board with 1 card. Finally, the glue that puts all these pieces together, Apostle of Disdain. A 3-cost 2/4 follower that every time that you damage it by your own effect during your turn gains +1 attack and storm. Remember Fumika I mentioned earlier? This means you can play her and Disciple of Disdain together and then immediately use the Disciple to proc Apostle, Storm, and extra damage. But you're probably thinking, how does this random Storm follower put the deck together? It's that evolve form, baby. For 1 cost, you can evolve her to use that on evolve effect that allows you to discard 1 from hand to look at the top 5 cards of the deck for up to 2 omen cards, which of course counts every card I've just shown you. This finds your Galmu, your spells, your followers, basically the connective tissue for everything as long as you don't whiff. So, after much testing and consideration, I decided Cool is a good matchup for me, and I'll be able to beat it, and I've been fighting countless Kwons in the previous format, and I even had to beat Kwon in my finals of the shop qualifiers, so I think it's time to settle on a Galmu list. After participating in a bunch of tournaments and playtesting with my group, these are the 50 cards I went with. As you can see, every Disdain piece is maxed out to make sure we're not whiffing Apostle. In the past, you could run 2 Hakyoku, but right now it's the card for many matchups, so 3 feels like a must. It does hurt when you draw into multiple at a bad timing, but I'm willing to take that gamble just to make sure I can at least find 1 at the right timing. The generics were running the Fina I previously mentioned as well as Phylene. She's great in stopping early aggro with her Fanfare to freeze an opposing follower so they can't refresh it in the opponent's next turn. Fumika, paired with her spell that destroys engaged followers too. In the past, I had actually taken out Dragon Oracle because this deck is a lot more mid-range tempo based than your typical ramp dragon, but now I just need to get to a point where I have followers on board as targets for my damage spells ASAP, so Oracle is an easy inclusion. Prime Dragon Keeper, or PDK for short, is insane in this meta in being able to deal 2 damage to an opponent's follower and 1 to the opponent's leader every time you play a 3-cost or lower dragon follower, which this deck is full of. Sometimes you can just going first, turn 3 PDK and pass, and then cool immediately starts to fold as you pick off their smaller pieces and they have to go tall instead of wide on their board. I was initially running 3 PDK, but there was a cool tech shown by Tomoda-san, one of Cygames' official casters, of running the one of Dragon Warrior as a good Fumika target, which can take out more of your opponent's taller board. Dragoneer is an insane card for this as well. He plays a dry weapon early, and then if you attach that weapon to another follower, you can evolve him to deal 4 damage to an opposing follower. If you didn't attach one, then it's just 2 damage, but this really helps fight early boards too. Finally, Forte is an easy 3 of with 2 in the evolve deck. She's one of our big aces, being able to run 7 damage to face with Aura. Fumika is at 2, mainly because I don't want to bloat the deck with big cost followers that might brick me. The evolve deck is pretty straightforward, but I did mull on 3 Galmu versus 3 Forte for quite a while, but in the end, Forte is still 5 damage even without evolving, whereas Galmu is just a vanilla if you don't evolve her. And with that, I set off for Grand Prix Chiba to improve my previous 5-3 record and make day 2. It's game time. For round 1, I got matched against Ma, an evolve YouTuber. Seeing that it was gonna be a dragon mirror, in my opening mulligan I was looking for ways to not run out of gas while having ways to answer any early threats as well. The Disdain Dragon Mirror often revolves around how each player navigates the early to mid game in a way that'll make it easy to either ping 6 damage with Galmu to the opponent's face in case they set up a ward, or swing in with a 7 damage unstoppable Forte for game. My opening hand post mulligan was rough. I had Phylene, Hakyoku, and other damaging spells, but unfortunately no Servant to connect into more card draw. Luckily, Phylene helped me control any early drops and early tempo until I managed to find Servant and Apostle to connect into Galmio herself, but while I was pressuring, my opponent was able to respond with an Akari to heal back up some of his defense, a card I chose to forego in my list for more widespread damage with PDK. After several back and forth turns, we were both within the 6 life range. All it took was a Galmu with 1 additional damaging effect or a Forte. My opponent spent a turn setting up a wide board with Fumika and passed. No wards. In my hand was the Storm that would decide this first match, Forte on evolve for 7 damage. Game 1 was in the bag. It was a very intense start to the day, and after finding out that my opponent was Ma, we had a quick chat to reflect on this intense match.
いや、無事1回戦目終わりました。
ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。で、2回戦目の相手がマーさん。
はい。
で、ちょっと自己紹介お願いします。
日本で YouTube やってます。エボルブのマーです。お願いします。
今日の意気込みとか、
もう今日は
目標。
もう優勝目指して、もうてっぺん目指して頑張ってます。なので、ベスト8で会いましょう。
そうそうそう。お願いします。そう。じゃあもうまさかの、ちょっとデッキの中身の話はちょっとしないんですけど、もうすごく熱い試合。
熱い試合、もうすごくギリギリ逆転を重ねたようなね。
そうそうそう。まさかエボルブの優勝に当たるとは全然思いませんでした。
いや本当に嬉しかったです。
いや
ありがとうござい
ます。
ぜひ頑張ってほしいなと思います。
いやこちらこそ。
優勝目指して。
お互いベスト8まで。
そうですね。ベスト8決勝で会いましょう。
そうそう。とりあえずデイを抜けて。
そうですね。
ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございます。
これからも頑張りましょう。
頑張りましょう。
Alright, round 1 is over. Was a very close match. So I am bringing Dragon today into a meta full of aggro board-based decks, and I think a lot of people kind of expect, like those that bring Dragon are bringing it because it's a good read into the meta, but the first match was actually a mirror, and because of that, it was quite rough. My early turns were really dry, but somehow was able to stabilize somewhere in the mid game and just go very wide with the board that he couldn't control too much, and we basically were both just in the state of like whoever top decks Forte wins, and at one point my opponent went for like 23 life. I managed to push him all the way down to 5, and we had to stay where he was at 5, I was at 4, and it was literally just like a game of, all right, I'm gonna clear your board, and whoever has like the remaining damage is gonna win. And so luckily managed to do it. So first round is a win. First round is a dub. Went lost the dice roll, but went first because in the mirror you do want to go second. And off to a good start. Feels really good to win round 1. Immediately gives you that kind of stress clearance. So pretty happy. And the opponent was a evolve YouTuber, so I was really happy to see somebody that's also putting in effort to liven up the Evolve scene in Japan. So very nice, and overall a good round. So 7 more to go. Let's make that day 2.
Round 2 pairings go up, and after sitting down, it looks like I'm up against Runecraft, most likely Kuon Spellchain. Against Kuon, the plan has always been to chip damage early, aggress with Forte, with her aura being quite tricky to take care of, and go wide so that their pinpoint spells can't cover the full board. The game started off great, being able to do what I aimed to by developing a board and chipping away at their life while I aimed down to secure lethal with Forte was an incredible start, but there had been one tech that many Kuon players were running as a one-of, searchable from Merlin that I forgot to account for. Concentration. This card allows the player to restore 3 defense to their leader while drawing a card for 3 play points. Yes, that means Merlin can replay it for free on Evolve. In the mid-game, I started to see the curtains close in. Right when I'd get close to lethal range, Concentration restore 3, Traditional Sorcerer restore 2. Over and over, I think my opponent might have healed 13 defense throughout this match. Slowly but surely, my resources were whittled away and Kuon spelled the end. But even after this close game, I'm glad I could sit down and talk to my opponent for a bit at the end.
はい、これで2回戦目終了しました。で、今回2回戦目でガヤマさんに当たって、すごくいい試合でしたけど、負けて、でももうすごくなんか最近からエボルブ始まってもう今も 2-0 ですよね。
そう、まあたまたま
いやもう普通に強くて、あとまあ普通に自己紹介もお願いしてもいいですか。
はい。ガーヤマって言います。で今大会はウィッチ使ってます。でこうやってなんか海外の人となんかエボルブできたりして、まあとてもなんかつながりを非常に感じれる大会なので、もっとこういうオフラインとかそういう大会に出場してみたいなって思えるきっかけになりました。今日はありがとうございました。
いやすごく嬉しいです。じゃあ海外のその英語版エボルブのユーザーに一言お願いしてもいいですか。
Enjoy Shadow of Us Evolve。
ありがとうございます。じゃあこれからも頑張ってください。
はい、ありがとうございました。
じゃあ Day2 で会いましょう。
よろしくお願いします。頑張ってください。
Alright, so that was round 2. As you heard from my opponent and me, unfortunately lost round 2. It was close. I had a really good start. I feel like drew like tempo, played very well, played carefully. But my opponent, I think, healed a total of 13 life playing Kuon. So they played the heal 3 spell once, then Merlin like evolved, played it again, and then did it again. And then they played the Shikigami that heals 2 twice. So I was like, oh, this is tough. It's like Dragon really relies on just bursting damage and kind of hoping your opponent doesn't recover. So it was a little bit rough, but I think even with 1-1, I mean, I have to win basically 5 more times. So 5 out of 6 rounds, keep it up. It was a close game, but like late game, I just couldn't draw anything that would help me push damage. So it was a bit unfortunate, but let's keep it going throughout the rest of these rounds.
With a 1-1 start, these next few games were must-wins if I wanted to protect my chance of topping, let alone making day 2. I sit down across my next opponent and they reveal they're playing the class I've spent all this time preparing for, Idolmaster. As I mentioned before, Idolmaster mainly has 3 decks that are commonly seen in this format: the quick and aggressive Cool, the forest-like Combo, and the long game sustained focus Cute. While Cool has been the most popular due to it being very easy and cheap to build and being very beginner friendly and an aggro deck that wins games fast, Cute, as I said, rose in response to that in being able to heal out of lethal ranges and sustain into the long game until aggro decks run out of resources. And my opponent was here to do just that. This was a long game. We traded blows continuously, but while the damage I took stuck due to there being no healing in my deck, every other damage in my deck was restored by the incredible healing powers of the Cute deck. Then, with my opponent being on 11 defense and me being below 5, time was called. Now, in an Evolve GP, time rules are a bit unique. The turn player, when time is called, gets to finish their place for that turn, called turn 0. After that, the opposing player gets to play out one last turn. However, if neither player wins the match from those 2 turns, it turns into a double loss for both players due to timing out. Time was called during my opponent's turn, thus letting them finish their turn, ending on 11 defense. Now, it's up to me to either find a way to do 11 damage or we both take the loss, something neither of us want to do since it means having to win every single game going forward.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Round 3 just finished and managed to barely win in like extra turns of time. So I played against Cute, which is one of the 2 meta variants of Idolmaster that I talked about in the intro, and it sustains like crazy. Like my opponent, I don't even want to count how much they healed. They healed like 2 on turn 2, then like 3, 3, 3, like a bunch of times, but somehow I like God even made some misplays, but managed to kind of keep tempo, keep destroying everything he had, and even when he went wide with boards, I was able to answer them. And thanks to PDK, dude, PDK is the MVP. I'm so glad I play her. She basically saved me going like Fumika into PDK into another one cost like Furudain to paralyze something on the board, and then essentially just be able to like dish out damage, like clear the board while chipping one life away at every time. Managed to connect into extra turns of time. My opponent had like 11 life, and I basically had just the card that draws from the Galmu engine. So play it, PDK to ping, and then draw a card, then play another one to ping and draw, and then after that managed to draw into the Forte for the last like 7 damage that I needed on top of everything else and clear the wards. Like, it was crazy. Very close match, but 2-1, and just need to win essentially 4 more times, and we'll be in there, but it's close. It's close. These games are insane, so do my best for the rest.
Round 4 is where we finally face off against what we've been prepping for since the beginning of September, Cool Idolmaster. This is the most literal example of a fast, aggressive deck that controls the tempo of the match from the very get-go and tries to win fast. Unfortunately, I lost the dice roll, which means my opponent gets to choose who goes first, which they of course will. I haven't mentioned it yet, but I've actually lost every single dice roll so far in this tournament, which is pretty rare in 4 rounds so far. My opponent starts turn 1 with a 1-drop as Cool always wants to, this one being Kako. While it's vital to answer your opponent's early board, I sadly don't see a Phylene to stop the 1-drop from going face next turn and have to pass on 1. Turn 2, he plays Nao for tempo despite her not having her effect live yet. My turn 2, I play out the Fina and destroy the 1-drop and pass. Turn 3 for my opponent, they swing face with a Nao for 2 damage and play out a 1-cost cut-in. Sporting 3-2 in stats, I'm blessed to have another Fina in hand to destroy that cut-in. However, now I'm stuck at a crossroads. All I've done so far is answer the board and haven't dealt any damage, and unfortunately have to start pushing some aggression here if I want to start getting tempo back as well. Fina is 3-2 in stats, so logically even if I don't trade into my opponent's 2-3 here, they'll trade it off to prevent me dealing further damage anyway. That's where I was wrong. My opponent is playing a tech that I did not account for, which a small portion of Cool Idolmaster lists have been playing, Angelic Maid. This is a spell that allows you to apply a +1/+3 buff to one of your followers. After I swing and pass turn, my opponent gets to their turn and that 2-3 suddenly becomes a 3-6 beast that Fina cannot swing into anymore. What's worse, my next turn I was planning to use my Disdain Searcher to find a Galmu and she doesn't do more than 4 damage either. I have to go for it anyway and try to find my damaging spells, which sadly doesn't connect. It was this decision to not trade off Fina that essentially lost me this game in that very moment. My opponent's snowballing didn't stop and I essentially continued to take storm damage in the following turns until my life hit 0. This isn't what I spent all this time practicing for, we have to do better. Being a 2-2, I couldn't afford to lose a single game going forward if I wanted to make day 2. Back against the wall, I'm praying to run into a favorable matchup or to at least win the dice roll finally so I can choose whether I want to go first or second depending on the matchup. I sit down for round 5 and this time the opponent is Runecraft. If I can win the dice roll, this is the kind of matchup I wouldn't mind going second in. The current iteration of Kuan runs a lot of Evolve followers, so if I go second, that prevents them from using them earlier in the game and building up that cemetery of spells for Spell Chain. Unfortunately, I lose the dice roll once again and my opponent chooses to go second instead. There's good parts of this too. I can try to push aggression going first and win before they get to have Kuon and D-Shift online, and things do go to that extent for the first half of the game. But, just like the last time we played against Kuon, that annoying one of tech rears its head once again, which often spells the end for this matchup, concentration. Why is it that when Cute heals most of the life back I manage to win somehow, but Kuon reuses their single one of healing spells 2-3 times and it's the end for me? Is it because they have so many damaging spells on top of that? Is it because you know it's over for you once they assemble their cemetery for D-Shift and Kuon? Just like the last game, my opponent continues healing and I'm somehow still managing to chip in damage and push them to a Galmu or Forte lethal range. But here's the problem. I'm on a clock and I can't seem to find my Galmu. No matter how much drawing and searching I've done, she's not showing up. If I can draw her, I have 3 damagers ready to use 1 to get the free evolve and 2 to run 6 damage to my opponent's face. Where is she? Forte won't do it. They've got the traditional sorcerer chilling, giving out wards to everyone. I need the effect damage to win. It's my last turn. My opponent searched D-Shift off of the Merlin last turn while reusing the heal, so I know that Kuon D-Shift is right around the corner. The Galmu didn't show up. And as expected, my opponent has the Kuons necessary to push face damage and the D-Shift to gain the extra turn.
All right, it is now post round 5 and round 4. I finally played against the Cool, the deck that I was preparing for. And today I haven't won a single dice roll, and I continue to not win a single dice roll, and they went first. And sadly I got run over while trying to answer their board, and couldn't really do too much, so went 2-2. And then round 5, paired against Kuon again, and once again lost a dice roll. And they once again healed a lot. And while it was close, I just couldn't draw into Galmu at all the whole game. And my opponent kind of understood that as well. So unfortunately 2-3, I am no longer in contention for day 2. So I don't think I make it for any of the side events anymore, unfortunately, either. But for tomorrow, at least, we can run it back. But for now, I think I'll still play out the main event, see how well we can finish. At the very least, do 5-3 like we did last time around. But definitely a bit frustrated. Maybe the deck choice wasn't the best. I was debating between that and Idolmaster, but decided to go with Galmu. So while it was fine, a little bit regretful, but a lot of friends are still in the tournament, so let's cheer them on, and hopefully they also get into day 2.
Well, at 2-3, there's no chance of me topping anymore. I love playing this game, and I wanted to be able to play as many games as I can during the first day of the tournament, so I decided to not drop and see if I can at least finish on a positive win rate. Sadly, playing more Evolve is not what I'll be doing this round, as my round 6 opponent did not show up due to probably forgetting to drop out of the tournament on Bushinavi before leaving the venue. 3-3, I guess. Round 7, I was a bit worried of the same happening, since anyone on the 3-3 line knows that they won't be able to make day 2 and usually drops out to do side events. But luckily for me, this time I faced a like-minded opponent that just wanted to play more Shadowverse Evolve. And much like my expectations, I run into Cool Idolmaster. If anything, this being my second Cool Idolmaster opponent out of 7 rounds is what's not matching my expectations. At long last, after 5 hours of dice rolls disappointing me, I finally win the dice roll. Oh, you know I'm going first, but there is a risk to it since Cool Idolmaster has a lot of good Evolve followers they can play turn 3 onwards. But I don't want to lose tempo by turn 3 like I did in the last time I matched this deck. Fina truly shone in this game, being able to pick off any 1-cost followers my opponent plays out. Going first means that when my opponent plays a 1-cost on their turn 1, my turn 2 play of Fina immediately puts tempo in my favor. I managed to layer Fina over Fina to shut down the Karen that hit my opponent's board on their turn 2. After that, I could keep swinging in with Fina's 3-2 body to chip away at my opponent's leader's defense, and usually if you can shut down the first 2 turns of Cool, you can usually control the tempo going forward. Hakyoku truly shone here too, being able to deal 2 AoE damage to opposing followers or 4 damage if Ganmi is on the board. With that, this matchup went exactly as I've practiced, and I managed to get to 4-3, a positive win rate. Just need one more win and I'll match my previous 5-3 record from the last GP Chiba in spring where I ran Octra's Sword. As you can probably tell, the Omens are some of my favorite characters in this franchise. And now for round 8, the final round of day 1 of the total 16 rounds across 2 days. Yes, 2,000 plus players will do that to your round count for a Swiss event. My last opponent is Haven, and this is the one that's the hardest to guess from just the class alone. After we started playing, however, I quickly realized this was Control Haven. It plays how you would expect it to. It heals a lot, gets rid of your stuff, and draws out the game until you either run out of resources or they get to Heavenly Aegis and spell Demise for you. Yes, Aegis is still a beast in a card pool 1 year ahead of the English one. The game plan for this matchup as Galmu isn't anything too far-fetched. Win before Heavenly Aegis comes online. Of course, their plan is to stop me from getting too much damage in so they can survive until Aegis can hit the field. This was going to be a long game no matter what. The game starts up and I was getting ahead, doing good damage, and I'm starting to line up for a lethal in a couple turns, even with minor healing or a Marwyn accounted for. But then, my opponent reveals a tech that I've never seen in any other Control Haven list, Gilnelis. In Evolve, Gilnelis is a 4-cost 3-5 with Drain that allows you to play another 3 play points on Fanfare to search your deck for a Craving's Splendor and Apostle of Craving and put them in your EX area. Then, every time you play a neutral card, you deal 1 damage to your opponent. Both those cards say that as long as Gilnelis is on board, they cost 0 to play, and the Apostle is the real problem. A 3-cost, now 0-cost, 2-2 that on Fanfare gives an allied follower Rush, that usually being Gilnelis, and if you evolve it for 1, it gives another follower on board 3 damage but then buffs it by 3 attack. You can use this to take out something on the opponent's board, or you can make Gilnelis a 6-2 that drains for 6, being a great source of healing while having 2 followers that can trade. It just keeps happening. I had to use my fortes to push damage and make up for the 6 being healed, and he just answered each forte with the Gilnillies. I can't believe another game is slipping away from me due to huge burst healing. I expected to face against Kuans and Aggro Idolmasters, but instead my turn run is being stopped by non-stop sustain. I managed to last out the Gilnillies festival and we're both low on resources now. Both of us in top deck mode. I cannot find the damage sources while my opponent top decks into the Heavenly Aegis that spells the end for this game. And thus, I finish with a very mixed result of 4-4. I don't particularly regret my deck choice, although looking back at how the matchups went, it definitely was a questionable one. As I said in the intro, I didn't trust myself to run it down with Aggro Idolmaster, and perhaps I just have to accept that Galmu peaked in the set 6 meta where I got my area qualification, and it's time to get back to the drawing board as we look towards the next tournaments. Now, while this video focused on the tournament experience, this entire weekend was a truly magical one, with all the different side events that I participated in, the lovely players that came up to talk to me and pick up English tokens I was giving out, and many of the famous commentators and Japanese ambassadors that were very kind to cooperate with me and say hello to the English community. There will be another video coming soon from GP Chiba after this, where you get to see a much more relaxed perspective of the whole venue and activities on offer, as well as many guest appearances, including the producer of the game himself. But to round out this tournament report, I felt that it was only fitting to quickly grab the man himself who managed to conquer the 16 grueling rounds of Swiss, run through the top 8, top 4, and finals and win the entire event, Nini, who conquered this event with Kuon Runecraft. Alright everyone, so at the end of the GP Chiba, we have managed to find our winner. 2選手おめでとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
So he is the winner of the GP Chiba. で、ちょっと自己紹介からお願いしてもいいですか。
はい、優勝させていただいたニーと申します。
おめでとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
本当におめでとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
使ったデッキがウィッチ。
そうですね、超越ウィッチって言われるタイプのデッキを使いました。
で、デッキの選択のなんか考え方とかに関してちょっと聞いてもいいですか。
はい。実際のインタビューの方でもお話しさせていただいたんですが、あまりプレイができてなかったので、何に使おうかなといったときに、あんまりいわゆるデレアイドルマスターのデッキ使ってた、手になじまなかった、使ってて、なんかあんまりフィットしなかったので、っていう中でどうしようって考えたときに、身内が、友人が、これ明日これ使うっていうのを、教えてくれたので、じゃあちょっとそれを借りて、ちょっと試してみようかなっていう、結構選択は結構かなり軽い気持ちで選んじゃったのかなっていったところはありますね。試してから優勝。わあ、すごすぎますですね。ちょっとかっこつけちゃいました。すみません。いや
すごい、本当におめでとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
で、これでもう GP の2000人以上の大会を優勝してからどういうもう気持ちですか。
いやもう多分生きててないと思うんですよ。2000人規模の今イベントで1位っていう称号というかいただけること本当に人生に1回あるかないかだと思うので、本当にそういう、素直に嬉しいなって思いますし、優勝して、身内が喜んでくれたりとか、応援してくれたりとかもそうなんですけど、一緒に対戦している方とかも毎試合毎試合どうでしたみたいなコミュニケーションを取って、お互い頑張りましょうみたいな、お互い決勝行けるように頑張りましょうみたいな風に鼓舞し合えたのは、本当にこのゲームやっててよかったなというか、本当にそれに尽きるかなといったところではございます。
はい、よかったです。
ありがとうございます。
GCS に向けての感想とかもう目標とかあります？
そうですね。今回の GP 楽しめればいいかなっていう結構軽い気持ちで入っちゃったんですが、本当にそのモットーというか、楽しむっていうことを忘れずに、チームメイトも助けてもらいながら、しっかりとこのゲーム遊ばせていただいて、もっと盛り上がっていける。そうですね。ただ出させていただくからには、しっかりと中途半端な気持ちは望まずに、しっかりと勝つ気持ちで頑張っていきたいなと思ってます。
いや、応援してます。
はい、ありがとうございます。
いや、で、見てる、英語版遊んでる皆さんに一言お願いしてもいいですか。英語版で2弾がもう超最近出て、もうバハムートとかのカードが最近出て、で、英語版のコミュニティにも一言お願いしてもいいですか。
はい。そうですね。自分もバハムートからこのゲームしっかりと始めて、本当にそれこで結構のめり込んで、本当に今このゲームとか、友人作ったりとかして本当に楽しませていただいているので、本当にこれからもっと面白くなるっていうのは私の口から保証できるので、このまま皆さんも楽しんで もっと盛り上げていただけたらなと思います。以上です。
ありがとうございます。もう一度おめでとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
はい。
And that concludes this GP Chiba tournament report. A huge thank you to Cygames and Bushrod for giving me permission to record all the footage you saw in this video throughout the event, and I hope that this has given you some hype and energy going forward into the open qualifiers happening in December and January. Finally, thank you very much to my crew, Savion and Pinosuke, who assisted with camera work and are the reason why I was able to bring this video in this fashion. Look forward to part 2, where I give you a look all around the venue and all the other great things happening at GP Chiba. And with that, that's going to be it for me today. If you liked the video, give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.